The morning sun did not merely rise over the Neo-Sahara, it ignited the horizon in a bruised purple and gold, reflecting off the heat-shielded glass of the sanctuary from the outside. The estate looked like a series of interlocking white petals fallen into the dunes, to Elias, standing on the observation deck. It was both a masterpiece of engineering and a very expensive cage. The sanctuary was the crown jewel of the Oasis District, a futuristic mega-mansion designed to be entirely self-sustaining. Its most famous feature, the one that graced every digital architectural digest from New York to Mars, was the curved infinity pool. It wrapped around the primary living quarters like a sapphire crescent, its edge seemingly pouring directly into the shifting sands of the desert floor, though in reality, the water was recycled through a complex subterranean filtration system. Elias adjusted the cuff of his linen shirt. He was the estate's primary curator, a title that essentially meant he was a high-end ghost. He ensured the air smelled of rain-drenched cedar, that the gravity-defying furniture remained dust-free, and that the owner's eccentricities were met before they were even voiced. Sterling is arriving in 10 minutes, a soft, synthesized voice chimed from the walls. It was Aria, the mansion's integrated AI. The water temperature in the curved infinity pool has been set to 28 degrees Celsius, as per his preference. "Thank you, Aria," Elias murmured. "Is the guest with him?" Biometric scans confirmed to passengers in the EROCRAFT.MR. Julian Sterling and a Miss Clara Vance. Elias felt a slight tightening in his chest. Julian Sterling was a man who owned entire sectors of the tech industry, a man whose ambition was as vast and cold as the vacuum of space. He had built this oasis not for comfort, but for conquest. Clara Vance, however, was a name Elias knew from the archives, a biologist who had once argued that the desert should be left to its own devices rather than conquered by luxury. The sound of the aircraft's thrusters was a low hum that vibrated through the floor's polished obsidian. It landed on the north pad, and a few moments later, the heavy pressurized doors slid open with a whisper of escaping air. Julian Sterling stepped in first. He was dressed in a sharp, charcoal-colored suit that seemed to defy the desert heat. Behind him, Clara Vance looked smaller, more fragile, her eyes darting around the cavernous foyer with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Elias," Julian said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I trust the house is breathing?" "Fully operational, sir," Elias replied with a slight bow. "The climate stabilizers are holding at a perfect equilibrium, and the gardens are in bloom." Julian didn't wait for further pleasantries. He gestured broadly to the space around them. The foyer opened into a grand atrium where bioluminescent vines climbed the walls, weaving through geometric patterns of brass and glass. "What do you think, Clara? A far cry from your dusty field tents, isn't it?" Clara walked toward the center of the room, her boots clicking softly. She looked up at the skylight, where a drone swarm was busy tinting the glass to block the harsh midday rays. "It's magnificent, Julian. But it feels like a museum for a world that's dying outside these walls." Julian laughed, a dry, short sound. "On the contrary. It's the blueprint for how we survive it. Come, let's see the pool. That's why you're really here, isn't it? To see how I've bent the water to my will." They walked through the living area, where the walls were not walls at all, but massive, curved screens displaying live feeds of deep-sea reefs. The transition from the interior to the outdoor terrace was seamless. The glass partitions slid into the floor, and suddenly, the dry, hot air of the desert met the cool, humid mist of the infinity pool. The pool was a marvel. It didn't just sit on the terrace, it flowed with the contours of the mansion's architecture. The curve was aggressive, a perfect semicircle that jutted out over the cliffside. Standing at the edge, one felt as though they were floating on a shard of glass over an ocean of sand. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered, walking toward the water's edge. She knelt down, reaching out a hand to touch the surface. "But the cost, Julian. The energy required to keep this much water from evaporating in this heat. It's obscene." "Efficiency is for those who can't afford to be grand," Julian said, joining her. He looked out over the dunes. "I wanted to create a paradox. A river in the middle of a drought. A curve in a world of jagged edges." Elias stood back, observing them. He saw the way Clara's reflection trembled in the water. There was a tension between them that went beyond architectural debate. They had been partners once, years ago, before Julian's hunger for the futuristic oasis project had driven a wedge between her preservationist ideals and his expansionist dreams. As the afternoon bled into evening, the mansion transformed. The interior lights dimmed to a soft amber, and the pool began to glow with an ethereal blue light from beneath the surface. Julian had retired to his study to take a call with the lunar colonies, leaving Clara alone on the terrace. Elias approached her with a tray containing a single glass of chilled nectar. "You look troubled, Miss Vance." She took the glass, her fingers cold. "Does he ever just sit here? Without a screen? Without a plan, Mr. Sterling doesn't sit, miss," Elias said softly. "He calculates." Clara looked at the curved infinity pool, the water perfectly still now. "He thinks he's saved a piece of the world here. But he's just built a beautiful tomb. He invited me here to show me his victory, but all I see is how much he's forgotten about the earth." "Perhaps," Elias ventured, "he invited you because he knows something is missing, even with all of this." Suddenly, the ground shuddered. It wasn't a violent earthquake, but a deep, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from the very bedrock of the mansion. "Arya, report," Elias said, his voice sharp. "Seismic activity detected in Sector 4, the air replied. The subterranean aquifers are experiencing a pressure surge. The cooling system for the infinity pool is overcompensating." The water in the pool began to ripple violently. The smooth, curved edge that usually looked like a static line of glass started to spill over in uneven sheets. Julian burst onto the terrace, his face flushed. "What's happening?" he shouted. "Elias, shut it down." "The system isn't responding to manual overrides, sir," Elias said, his hands flying over a holographic terminal that projected from his wrist. "The desert is pushing back. The thermal expansion of the sand has cracked one of the external intake valves." Clara didn't panic. She walked to the very edge of the curved pool, watching as the blue water began to turn a muddy brown, infiltrated by the very desert Julian had tried to shut out. "It's the pressure, Julian. You built the pool too deep into the shelf. You're trying to hold back the weight of the dunes with a curve of glass." For a moment, the futuristic oasis felt fragile. The lights flickered, and the sound of the desert wind, usually a distant whistle, became a roar as the environmental shield struggled. Julian looked at his creation, his hands trembling. The perfect infinity pool was now a swirling vortex of silt and recycled water. "Fix it," Julian pleaded, looking at Clara. "You know the geology of this basin better than anyone. How do I stop the surge?" Clara looked at the water, then at Julian. "You can't stop it by fighting it. You have to let the pressure equalize. You have to open the spillways." "The spillways?" Julian gasped. "That will flood the lower gardens. It will ruin the biodomes." "It will save the foundation," she countered. "Otherwise, the whole terrace, the whole dream slides into the canyon." Julian hesitated, his ego warring with his survival instinct. He looked at the curved infinity pool, the symbol of his absolute control. With a jagged breath, he nodded to Elias, "Do it. Open the spillways." Elias entered the command. There was a heavy, metallic clunk deep beneath their feet. For a heart-stopping second, the water level in the pool rose even higher, nearly crusting the glass. Then, with a sudden, sucking sound, the volume plummeted. The muddy water drained into the emergency reservoirs, and the shaking stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. The mansion remained standing, but the illusion of the perfect, untouched oasis was gone. The pool was half empty, its pristine blue surface stained with the grit of the Neo-Sahara. Julian sank into one of the designer chairs, his head in his hands. The futuristic titan looked, for the first time, like a man who had simply built a house in the wrong place. Clara walked over to him, but she didn't offer a platitude. She stood by the curved edge, looking out at the stars that were now visible as the drone swarm dispersed. "It's still a beautiful view, Julian. Even without the water." "It was supposed to be perfect," he whispered. Nothing in the desert is perfect, she said. It's just resilient. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The AI was quiet, busy running repair diagnostics. Elias found Julian and Clara on the terrace. They weren't arguing anymore. They were looking at a digital map of the estate, discussing how to integrate the local flora into the filtration system to work with the sand rather than against it. The curved infinity pool was being refilled, but this time, Julian had instructed the AI to leave the water at a lower level, allowing the natural stone of the basin to show. It looked less like a miracle and more like a part of the landscape. Elias served them coffee as the sun began its climb once more. The mega mansion was still a feat of technology, a gleaming white flower in the wasteland, but the air felt clearer. The tension had broken with the spillways. "Will you stay for the renovations, Clara?" Julian asked, his voice lacking its usual edge of command. Clara looked at the pool, the curve of it catching the first light of dawn. "Only if we stop calling it a sanctuary." "It's a home, Julian. It should feel like one." Julian looked out at his empire, then back at the woman who had seen the cracks in his glass walls. "A home," he repeated softly. "I think I can learn how to build that." Elias stepped back, a small smile playing on his lips. He looked at the mansion, the high ceilings, the obsidian floors, and that magnificent, curved infinity pool. It was no longer just a display of wealth, it was a testament to a hard-learned lesson. In the heart of a futuristic oasis, the most important thing wasn't the technology that kept the world out, but the courage to let a little bit of the world in. As the aircraft for the supply run hummed in the distance, Elias realized his job had changed. He wasn't just a curator of a museum anymore. He was the caretaker of a living, breathing thing. And as the water finally crested the edge of the pool, spilling over in a perfect, shimmering curtain, he knew that the sanctuary had finally become what it was always meant to be, a place where the future didn't just look at the desert, but learn to live within its curve.